I don't have to, I get to. I get to breathe today. I get to run today. I get to look upon the Rocky Mountains today. I get to smile today. I get to be an example today, a leader. I get to lend a helping hand today. I get to learn today. I get to listen today. I get to love today. I get to embrace the suck today. I get to dream today. Today, I get to. I don't have to do anything today. But guess what? I get to, and I will. And with that being read, I want to welcome you back to the 127 Fit podcast. Today's guest is a father, professional ultra runner, Army veteran, and plant-powered athlete. Today's guest is Joshua Stevens. Joshua, I want to welcome you to the 127 Fit podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, and I just want to thank you right away for taking time out of your schedule to hang out with myself and the guests, and I'm really excited to dig into your story and give you the platform and the opportunity just to share a little bit about yourself, because I know there's going to be a lot of listeners out there, Joshua, that are going to be able to relate on some level to some part of your story, and they're going to be able to just kind of take maybe something that you share today away from the podcast and apply that to their life and be able to maybe start tackling some goals and some dreams that they've maybe been putting off. So thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, it's a privilege.
Cool. So let's kick things off, Joshua, with just a little bit of a background. Maybe if you just want to share with us maybe where you kind of got your start, where you grew up, kind of the home environment, if you were involved in athletics and sports growing up, and then we'll just kind of go with the flow from there.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in rural Maine, mid-coast of Maine. The most prominent town nearby in geographical terms is a place called Booth Bay Harbor, which is kind of idyllic coastal Maine town. I actually grew up in the sprawling metropolis of Edgecombe, Maine, which was, again, very, very rural. And I think as we, kind of deconstruct the involvement in athletics that led me to where I am today, it played a critical role in that because of its rural nature, I spent a tremendous amount of time outside. And I was fortunate enough to participate in any number of sports that ranged from cross country and soccer and wrestling and basketball and tennis, none of which I was ever really good at. I would consider myself a bit of a late bloomer, but yeah, where I grew up and then eventually in the same state I attended for my undergraduate work at the University of Maine at Orono, really created the formative construct or template, if you will, for endurance athletics and a love of being outside.
Cool. Now, when you say rural, how big of a town was it actually that you grew up in? Because I grew up in a small town in northwest Iowa, and that was 5,000 people. Are we talking bigger or smaller than 5,000?
Oh, 5,000 would seem like probably a borough in New York
Okay.
City by comparison. No, I mean, I don't know.
So like a few hundred probably?
Yeah,
or?
I mean, this is, this dates myself. This was, during the 70s and 80s, and I know that it's grown since then, but it's a relatively small town.
Yeah,
and to give you a visual, tool, it would be, it's Norman Rockwellian. I mean, really very beautiful and lovely in the summertime. In all of my travels globally and here in the States, for my money, July and August on the coast of Maine is the most beautiful place I've ever seen. But yeah, we didn't have cable television. We didn't,
Right.
This is obviously pre-internet. It was, had over a quarter-mile dirt driveway. You could kind of see neighbors over the distance.
Right.
7 acres out in rural Maine. So
Cool.
yeah.
Now, in regards to athletics, when you were growing up and stuff, I think you mentioned something about maybe not always. Did you not always excel at athletics? And did you have to kind of try to be like the hardest worker? And did that kind of play into some of who you are today then, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's really, as I've gotten older, I think I have a better appreciation upon inspecting through the rearview mirror a little bit of the struggles that I encountered because I was small. I wasn't particularly fast or coordinated. And, you know, before I go down the rabbit hole of, you know, this kind of Rudy type concept, it wasn't that. I mean, I was passionate. I loved sports, and I was decent at them. I wasn't completely in that, but I grew slowly. So a lot of the boys are bigger than me,
Yeah.
And you know, I was good enough eventually to get on the varsity programs,
Right.
But I was definitely never one of the top athletes. I was definitely, you know, I was you know, fair to middling, but it really planted a seed in me that I nurtured and cultivated for many years later. In a manner that made me very successful,
Right.
Because I never thought that I, you know, was given the respect that maybe I should have been, or I certainly, what I think in a positive extrinsic manner, I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, because I always felt my limiting factor was, you know, I was this middle-class kid from rural Maine who was shorter and slower than, but I knew that eventually I would find my way, and thank goodness that I didn't just get a lot of stuff handed to me, because I certainly wouldn't be here right now had that been the case.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I can personally relate, because I know I weighed 103 pounds going into my freshman year of high school, and you know, so I was also a late bloomer, and that was just something for me. And even to this day, it's like I was never, again, I made varsity sports teams and all that type of stuff, played Division III football for a year. So, you know, and athletics is a big part of my life, but there was always somebody more talented, somebody faster, stronger, and usually not just one, but a lot. The way that I survived and, you know, was able to, you know, just get on those varsity teams was through that work ethic and outworking everybody. Yeah. And I don't want to say I necessarily had a chip on my shoulder, and I don't have a chip on my shoulder to this day, but just that experience of kind of being a late bloomer and being undersized and just saying, hey, you know what, the way that I'm gonna, you know, eat at the table is to outwork everybody and outcondition everybody and things of that nature. So, and I'm sure there's some listeners out there that are probably shaking their head up and down agreeing like, hey, yeah, I'm right with you guys. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I know that, you know, we're all products of our home environment, even to this day on some level, and the experiences that we go through in childhood when our brain and our heart and our body is developing plays a big role of, you know, who we are and who we become. So yeah. I appreciate you touching on that and sharing that, Joshua. So now in the introduction, I mentioned that you're an Army veteran. So I just kind of want to transition from childhood and you growing up in Maine and some of those experiences. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with the listener how kind of the military came on your radar, and then did you enlist or join the military right out of high school? Did you go to college first? What does that kind of look like, that season of your life?
Great question. And it's an interesting path, not in so much as the military being outside the purview of my familial history. I think that service to country was something inculcated into my family, particularly my paternal side, with generally many members of the family having served for 4 years, enlisting to give back prior to moving into the family business, which was shipbuilding. I felt that I believe I was 17 when I enlisted in what was at that time in the late 80s referred to as the delayed entry program. Which means I could enlist before I was 18, but when I was 18, that would be the soonest that I was able to go to basic training. I'd like to say that there was some kind of overpowering altruistic motivation to do it, but truth be told, I think part of it is the journey of many young men and women who grow up in a fairly cloistered environment, that I wanted to see what else was out there. There was this vein of service that existed, so it wasn't a significant leap to get there, but it wasn't solely for the purpose of serving others. That came much later as I matured and grew up. But yeah, I think there were two kids that the Army recruiter had come by and had done their pitch, and a couple of my buddies had signed up. And
Right.
I said, well, that seems like that's a cool thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got into
Okay.
it. I enlisted in the Army Reserves as an infantryman, and then I think there was an old weapon system called the M47 Dragon, which again will date me. That was my specialty, and I believe at some point shortly after basic training, the Army felt that I might not have been achieving my full potential as a private in the infantry, and I was given the opportunity to do what was called the Green to Gold program.
Okay.
I joined ROTC at the University of Maine at Orlando.
Cool. Awesome. Very cool. So what was the, and before I ask this next question, how many total years then did you serve in the Army?
In all capacities, 24
24 years. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Very
so,
cool.
From 1989 roughly to early 2014.
Okay, very cool. Now, maybe there's more than one, but let's just maybe focus on one. What would you say was the greatest lesson that you learned and that is still very valuable in your life through your military experience?
A fantastic question. I think I hopefully have a fairly succinct bifurcated response, which is one, a sense of selflessness in so much as the world did not, nor did the universe revolve around me. And I think being self-involved is every human's journey, or at least their starting point. We have some bandwidth for, care and compassion and love for people outside of ourselves, but generally we grow up and I think spend most of our lives thinking about ourselves. And there's some negative connotations in there, and there's some positive ones. But I quickly realized the world was much bigger than Edgecombe, Maine.
Right.
Exposure to different socioeconomic groups. All of a sudden, I was in an environment where I was surrounded by African American soldiers my age from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, gangbangers from South Central LA,
Right.
farm kids from Nebraska. And I realized that, as my mom used to say, you're unique, but your problems aren't. That it was a great big world with a lot of people. And then that only grew exponentially as I served for a while and got into some more specialized units and deployed on global missions. I continued to grow and understand that the world was amazingly large and that there was so much service to be done, and that learning to focus less on myself and to appreciate more the people around me, really that's where the growth of the Army came from. And so you kind of tangentially talk about just what it did to me individually, and then what I learned as a global citizen. And then they ended up coming back together, like selflessness and service to others were what I hope I'm still employing today.
Beautiful.
Years after I've served.
Very, very cool. Thank you. So you're a dad, you're a father, and did your kids come along then during your time in the military? And then after you answer that, I would just like to give you the opportunity to share with myself and the listeners, Joshua, what being a dad, what being a father means to you, and the importance of your kids in your life.
Yeah, that's an area where you hope you're constantly improving. So I've got 3 amazing children, a 17-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old son, and a 6-year-old son. And I've been married twice previously to 2 extraordinary women, both brilliant intellectually and very successful in their professional endeavors. And both of those relationships overlapped with my time in the military. So my 3 children came along, spaced out.
Right.
Really, the measuring stick, that I can look at this century, the 21st century, had a lot to do post 9/11. So I had 2, my older children, really during the meaty mid part of the 2000s with Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. And then my youngest little guy came kind of toward the end of my career after I'd been deployed to Haiti for response to the 2010 earthquake. Within a couple of years, he came along. So they definitely play significant roles. That's not profound or seminal. Those are my children.
Right.
But they came into my life at a time of great success and then some great personal failings. When we'll talk to some level of specificity about my struggles with prescription pain medications after a number of surgeries that resulted from combat wounds incurred in Iraq.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Now, you talked about earlier the overall lesson that you took away from the military being selflessness. Is that, I'm assuming, probably magnified even greater being a dad and realizing again, hey, it's not about me. There's a child, there's children now, and I need to improve, I need to get better, I need to, when I come home from deployment, there's just a different responsibility and a greater degree of understanding that selflessness. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely accurate and absolutely fair to say. I would like to think that my service to country has, albeit with some regret in a latent way, improved my service to my kids. They continue to play obviously very fundamentally important roles in my life, but I'm now in a position career-wise where I can invest more time,
right,
and be more loving, and you're working on being present as frequently as possible. Coming from a family whose parents got divorced, I have really hoped that I've taken the time to be introspective enough to learn what didn't work and then what should work. But again, I give just tremendous credit to my kids' moms. I mean, they're amazing, and they've been very patient and supportive of me and all
right.
my crazy journeys and endeavors. And I think I'm now at a point where I've crossed the salient point of service to a greater group of strangers, to a point where I've become much more adept at looking down and hopefully serving my kids in a way that they deserve. Awesome.
So let's start talking about, Joshua, if you don't mind, a little bit, some of the things that happened during your time in the military while you were deployed. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'll just let you kind of share. I think there was an accident or injury or something, and then let's if you don't mind, start talking about how the addiction to the prescription drugs kind of came on the scene. And I know, as I did some research on you and listening to your story a little bit through some other podcasts and some other mediums, you talked about and kind of said that you consider yourself a pretty clean cut guy, pretty dialed in, and there was no addiction beforehand. And then, some events happened while you were in the military deployed, and then it seems like you kind of went through that struggle of addiction. So do you want to maybe just unpack that a little bit for myself, a little bit clearer, and then also for the listeners, please?
Yeah. Now, I gladly share this story because I think it's one of the greatest gifts that I've been endowed with on my time on the planet. The great tragedy of the opiate epidemic that we're facing today, I can say that I was a part of that. And I don't consider myself a victim nor a casualty, but I am definitely someone who did not fit the formula for a person who would have been likely to become addicted to what started as prescription opiates. I was a straight edge kid, and part of that was just where I grew up. I mean, it was really, were there drugs and alcohol to some degree around when I was in high school? Yeah, but it was certainly not prolific. And when I say drugs, I mean marijuana may have been, and probably, I'm not a good judge, but it probably was awful. I mean, there was, and I just didn't drink. I can say, although my GPA and probably my teachers wouldn't remember this as such a glorious experience, but I never skipped a day of high school. I never smoked or drank or did anything of that nature. And then I got into the military, and that kind of set the table for the rest of my behavior. And I would drink socially in my 20s, but I was an Army officer, so I led a really kind of straight-edged lifestyle. And that wasn't any kind of struggle. That was who I saw myself as. That's who I felt I was, and that was what I felt was the least I could do in serving my country. And so you fast forward into the 2000s. I've been in the military for quite some time. I started off in the infantry and served in 10th Mountain Division, and then was invited to come try out for the 75th Ranger Regiment, and successfully went through that selection process and served in a Ranger Battalion, and moved back to some infantry positions before kind of transitioning over to the Army Special Operations Forces side of the house, where I spent the bulk of my time in a variety of units within there. And somewhere shortly after a deployment to Iraq, and I deployed on that trip in 2004, prior to Christmas, and 2005 time frame, I was involved in an improvised explosive device incident, a roadside bomb in a town called Beji, kind of a large city in northern Salah ad-Din province. And as a result of that contact, I had my neck, cervical spine was broken, and had some other injuries. That was the first of a number of exposures I had on multiple combat deployments, and that resulted in 2 cervical spinal surgeries. The first at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in 2008, and the second in 2011 at Womack Army Medical Center. And to kind of tie this back to the original question, was that at my time in my life, at 37 I think, is when I first became exposed to a narcotic. Okay. So that's when I was given pain medication. Right. It happened on the battlefield. So that really, the first time I was given morphine, but post surgery is when it really became an issue, in that I went from using it as prescribed to abusing it.
Okay. So now, once you started the abusing the prescription drugs and stuff, what was kind of the time frame of that addiction? And then let's just, if you don't mind sharing, what was kind of the thought process during that addiction, and then where did you start seeing the light of like, hey, I'm walking down the wrong path right now. I know that I'm better, or I shouldn't be here, or what was kind of just going through your mind, if you can kind of walk us back during that time of addiction and the length of that addiction.
Sure, it's a really complex response, and I'll try to provide it in a way that makes sense. There were so many issues that I was contending with that extend far beyond the physical discomfort of being wounded in combat operations. Now, many years later, with the benefit of intense therapy and just a host of treatments and resources that I've gained through the VA and through some private organizations that I now do work for as an athlete, the post-traumatic stress disorder component, the traumatic brain injury component, all played a part in, I think, delaying my recognition that I'd become addicted to prescription opiates. And the real reason that, if you want my opinion, where we need to focus on people, this large segment of middle America that has become hopelessly addicted to pain medication, isn't from heroin that's being imported illegally from other countries. The data speaks for itself. It mostly started in circumstances with people like me.
Right.
That I'm a good guy, I follow the rules, I play by the rules. A doctor's giving me this medication, how can it be bad? So simultaneously, it's mitigating this physical pain that I'm having, but it's numbing this emotional trauma, the loss of colleagues, the horrific things that you see in combat, separation from my kids and family. All of those things are being handled by this medication. I would say for me, maybe within the latter part of 6 months to a year, I started having to be honest with myself and recognizing that I wasn't just using the medication in the manner it had been intended. I played that kind of game for probably a couple of years, and I would say 3 years into my 6-year use of opiates, I was unequivocally abusing the medication in a way that was leading me further down this spiral.
Okay. If somebody is listening to this, Joshua, and they are in the midst of an addiction, whatever type of addiction that might be, whatever struggle they're enduring right now, is there maybe just some advice, or maybe just something that really helped you to maybe get that switch in your brain to kind of click and move in a different direction? Is there maybe just something that you would want to share with the listener, like, hey, if you're struggling with something or going through an addiction right now, this is what I would suggest?
Yes, one, be honest with yourself.
Be honest?
Yeah, be honest with yourself. And that sounds like a fairly obvious platitude, but anyone who has struggled with substance use disorder understands that your body, and I can only speak from my experience,
right,
but your body is responding and demanding things. Your brain chemistry is being altered in such a way that being honest with yourself is a fairly significant leap. most substance use disorder patients become very adept at lying, because that's how you get through your day, is where do I get my next score? How do I get my next fix? And that creates this network of dishonesty that you have to unravel, or it unravels around you at some point. For me, I would say be honest with yourself. Own where you're at. And I would gladly share that I think today we're doing an exponentially better job of providing resources and outlets for people who, like me, needed help.
Right.
I did a lot of it on my own, which I don't recommend. But again, in the number of years since my struggle, the resources have grown again by leaps and bounds. So be honest with yourself, and then reach out for help.
Okay. Did your experience with the prescription drugs that you got, during your time in the military and stuff, did that create any sort of bitterness or angst or anything towards the military? And if so, is that something that you had to overcome as you just kind of looked inward and had to really become honest with yourself? Was some of that angst and bitterness something that you kind of had to struggle with towards the military, even though it seems like you had overall a great experience with the military?
Probably one of the best questions I've been asked, honestly. And I think, yes, but it would be misguided. Any frustration or having to own your failures and shortcomings is not easy, right? And none of us enjoy that. It's always easier to point the finger of blame. And I could also sit here and get red in the face and berate Big Pharma as well as the medical community. The Army was outstanding and extraordinary, and I was fortunate to serve in a number of fairly elite units where I had the best medical practitioners available.
Right.
They were doing the best they had, the best they could with the best information they had at the time. There was no nefarious effort on anyone's part that led me down the path I went. I would say that if you had to pull out focus, I believe, and it's played itself out in the federal court system as well as now in the court of public opinion, that Big Pharma was very dishonest with a lot of earnest medical practitioners for many years.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the company that Purdue that created OxyContin was using false data in the presentation from their pharmaceutical sales reps to medical practitioners. You can't divorce that from the equation. But the only person to blame for where I was me.
Right.
And that has gotten better at time that I don't, if this hadn't happened, or I hadn't been blown up, or I hadn't been there, or that guy hadn't written me that prescription, that's nonsense. I mean, I chose to be where I was at. I was privileged enough to be there, and I had to own the baggage when it came with it.
Thank you for sharing that, Joshua. So let's transition into kind of who you are today and where you're at today professionally, and that's being a professional ultra runner. And I think specifically, is it trail? And is that kind of your main focus?
Yeah.
Professional ultra trail runner? Is that how you correctly say it?
That's the surface that I enjoy the most.
Okay.
Although this year we'll be diverting from that a little
Okay.
bit.
Now, since you mentioned that, I had heard, I think, on a podcast in January that you were on of this year, that you were waiting, I think, to the early part of February to see if you were going to get invited to, was it Badwater?
Yeah.
So did you get the invitation? Are you going to get to run that race? Okay,
I did.
cool.
It was
cool.
probably the highlight so far of my career. It's to give a little bit of context. There's a great icon in our business named Scott Jurek, who lives here with his amazing family in Boulder. Scott is a legendary ultra runner. and a New York Times best-selling author. And his book, Eat and Run, came into my life at a really critical point as I was recovering from opiate addiction and transitioning after a full career in the military and trying to find a purpose for what I was going to do in my early 40s. And subsequently, the first chapter in Scott's first book, Eat and Run, is a vignette about this horrific experience he had when he actually won the Badwater 135-mile race in the mid-2000s, I think. And I said, that's, on Sage's podcast, I think the one you're referring to, I said, that sounds awful. That's absolutely what I want to do. And I have worked for years to get to a point where I've met the qualifications even to apply.
Right.
It's a race that Chris Kostman, the RD, who's been the race director for 20 years for that race, in their committee take very seriously. They only accept 100 athletes from around the world every year, and only roughly 45 of those are rookies. And I applied this year and then watched the live announcement on the 15th and was, needless to say, pretty stoked.
Congratulations, because I've just through my research, and I know somebody that a lot of the listeners maybe out there have heard, who's been getting a lot of attention lately because he just came out with a book and been on the Joe Rogan podcast, is David Goggins.
Yes.
And I know that he's run Badwater several times, and maybe through David Goggins' story, somebody has heard about Badwater, and through him and through some other books that I've read and stuff, I've learned a little bit about Badwater, but it is definitely, like you just said, it's you've got to have an application, you know what I mean? You've got to have a resume and accepted. So congratulations, man, because I know on the podcast that came out in early January, you were pretty excited about the time of finding out, and so that's kind of cool here on the 127 Fit podcast. You get to kind of share with the listeners that you did get accepted. You are going to be running that. When is that going to be taking place?
So yeah, and it's since that last podcast, a couple of big things happened. This being one of them. I also had put in to the lottery for the Leadville 100.
Okay, cool. And that's local here in Colorado, correct, for the listeners?
Yeah, the race across the sky.
Right.
And amazingly, I was selected in that as well.
Sweet.
So the Badwater 135 is that's the center of gravity for that race series, which is now, they have several different races within the series. So I will compete this year in what's called the Badwater Ultra Cup, now that I've been officially invited. It starts with my first race next month in North Carolina, a 51.4 mile race called the Badwater Cape Fear, which occurs in a lovely place called Bald Head Island, North Carolina, down near Wilmington. And then in April, at the end of April, I'll travel down to California to do the Badwater Salton Sea, which is an 81-mile team race. And then I will go out to Death Valley in the middle of July to toe the line with the Badwater 135, and I will attempt to double, what's called double, and fly back up here to Colorado and participate in the Leadville 100, which is all above 10,000 feet of elevation, literally 1 month after Badwater.
Wow.
Then I may retire. I don't know.
No, that's the fun's just going to begin at that point, right?
Yeah. So cool. This has been it's such a blessing. I can't speak to my good fortune. These are dreams I've had for years, and again, I don't want to sound disingenuous or like I'm invoking hyperbole. I'm literally the happiest man in the world, because this is what a privilege and an honor.
Right.
What a privilege.
Right. And I just want to speak on that for a moment, because a lot of people, I feel like, Joshua, they have dreams, they have these goals and these aspirations and kind of this loftiness that's kind of way out in the distance. But it seems like in my life experience and just observing people and things of that nature, a lot of people get stuck. And so you have gone through, you've put in the work, whether it's through the military and all of that experience, and serving in special forces, and serving our country and fighting in wars, and then getting into the ultra running. And we're actually sitting in a place right now, and you're doing a part of your recovery during this podcast. So why don't you just speak on that, though? Because I want the listeners out there that maybe have some lofty goals and some lofty dreams, but maybe they're stuck. Would you speak on, Joshua, just the importance of, hey, it's great to dream. I consider myself a dreamer. Sure. I have goals, I have vision, all this stuff, but we're never going to accomplish any of that, or we're never going to have the opportunity to walk through open doors if we don't take that first step in that right direction of the direction we think we need to be going. And it starts with, just that hard work and consistency and being prepared for those open doors. So sure. Would you just speak on that? Just what it takes to achieve goals and achieve dreams, and some of that loftiness that you are now having the opportunity to achieve in your life.
Sure. You have to take advantage of the privileges and opportunities that you're given. That is really the baseline. So I was born a middle-class, white, straight male in America in the 20th century. I'd already won the lottery. I'd already been given a hand up compared to many, many people across the world throughout history. Whether or not I recognize that as a young man is still up for debate in terms of me, trying to always grow, recognizing from where I came. So I had an advantage from the start, but I also was given the gift of a work ethic that came from a largely blue collar background in Maine in the 70s and 80s. There's no bypassing work, and that doesn't sound profound or seminal, but there's nothing that I've ever been fortunate enough to participate in, whether it's in elite military units or being surrounded by high-performing athletes, that didn't occur because of anything other than just, as Rich Roll calls it, the canon of consistency combined with hard work. And I don't have anything more magical to share with anybody. Why do people get stuck? Well, there's a variety of environmental influences and factors, and sometimes things outside of people's control. But if you bring up names like Dave Goggins or Scott Jurek or Kara Goucher, any of these other people that I have nothing but the highest regard for, they all got to where they're at because they grind it out every single day. Absolutely. They get up every day, whether they feel like it or not, whether it's from extrinsic motivating factors or intrinsic motivating factors. You get up, whether it's cold, raining, hot, humid. Today, my car broke down, still had to get my workout in before I came down here. You borrow your neighbor's car. You do whatever you have to do to make it happen. I think everything else, brother, is window dressing compared to that. Because I can talk about technique, and I can talk about tactics and procedures and what I do for recovery and what my coach does. But if you don't put in the work, then the rest of that is just cocktail party information. It's not going to get you anywhere.
Right. Amen. I appreciate you sharing that. It's definitely the sentiment that I have. So you got to put in the work. You got to put in the grind. That's life. So, and then those doors of opportunity, as you're consistently doing that, will open up. And yes, if you're prepared and you're consistent, you're working hard, you're ready, you're going to be able to walk through those doors, and whatever happens. And those dreams and those goals and that loftiness that you have way down the road, it's before you know it's right in front of you, and you're accomplishing it, right?
So I agree, and I would like to add that where I got today in terms of ultra running, a lot of it had to, those windows of opportunity only presented themselves because of the hard work, because I was willing to take chances and I was willing to travel to one of the most competitive pockets of endurance athletes in the world, because I was willing to take some risk, to believe in myself, and to put in the work. Had I not done those things, then I would have never seen that window open. So as we used in the military, they said you march to the sound of the guns. You always move to where the action is. I moved to where the action is. I put in the work, and then the blessings presented themselves. Absolutely. And then I knew, okay, there's only one direction, that's through the window.
Right.
But without the work, they would have probably never even presented themselves as
absolutely
options.
Yep, absolutely. I agree 100%. So where did I know, and I'm sure the listeners know that when you were in the military, you ran. There's running and there's rucking, all that type of stuff. Most of us have an understanding of that. But where did this ultra running come into the picture? Was it towards the end of your military career? Was it completely when you were retired from the military? Where did that kind of take off for you?
Yeah, the construct in which I operate in today is fairly defined, and ultra running is largely accepted as anything that exceeds the marathon distance of 26.2 miles. For competitive purposes, it's largely agreed upon in my industry that the 50K distance or the 31-mile distance is and beyond is considered ultra running or ultra marathon running. I had done things beyond that, but I'd never run that far. Rucked and done long distance movements, but I was largely unaware of this whole other world of lunatics that, going back to Gordy Ainsleigh and the father of Western States 100 and maybe the father of ultra running, back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, there was this vibrant little community of outcasts that were doing these long distances. I'd been doing that kind of work in the Army, but it wasn't until as I closed in on retirement that I became aware of ultra running as kind of a cottage industry, if you will. I'd watched J.B. Benner's movie Unbreakable about the Western States 100, and then the seed being planted is maybe an understatement. It's more like getting hit on the head with an anvil that had been dropped above my head like a Wile E. Coyote bet. I said, that's what I'm going to do. Now, keep in mind, at this point, I'm really trying to get clean off of painkillers. I've had another spinal surgery. I've been told by one surgeon that I'd never run again. You use the word lofty. I don't know I don't know that lofty gets any loftier than, hey, I'm broken guy in his 40s on a couch in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I think I'm going to run professionally as a mountain.
Right.
But that's where it started.
Cool. Now, what would somebody kind of take a step back, because I know this will speak to somebody out there, somebody who is currently in the military and they know that their time is coming to an end. How important is it for that person or persons to have a game plan or have something to step right into after the military? Because as I have listened to other podcasts and other veterans share their stories, a lot of them, especially the ones coming from special forces units, because you have to be so focused, you have to be just all consumed with what you're doing, the task at hand, and then the retirement comes, or an incident happens and they're discharged, and then it's like, now what? So would you just be able to speak on that just quickly, Josh, with the importance of the veteran or the person that is going to soon be a veteran, and them kind of thinking about the future post-military?
Wonderful. And it's something that is easier said than done, and it doesn't sound, again, like a highly complex transition, but it's magnified in levels of difficulty by how, in relation to how long someone has served. So let's say, for argument's sake, we're talking about someone who serves a career of 20 to 30 years.
Right.
You generally start in this vocation very young, your late teens. And it is your identity. It is largely how you value your own worth as a man or a woman in your community and in society at large. There is a higher purpose or a higher calling if you're doing it right, not unlike people who serve in a variety of service positions, being in first responders, law enforcement, people that work for the Peace Corps or work in diplomatic circles. If you could do it in theological groups, people who do mission work for their particular church. That is how you see yourself, and you don't really recognize how challenging a transition it is going to be until it's not there. And it becomes existential. Like, who am I? I'm all of a sudden in my early 40s. All I've ever done is X or Y. Now, what do I do? And it's not about just finding something to pay the bills. You go from what I think is a higher calling or a purpose to serve to what you could be working in any number of vocations that don't have. I mean, you may make more money or have more prestige, but it's hollow. So, learning, I think, early to not so intrinsically tie your self-worth and your value and your identity to what you do for work is the most important part. There are plenty of tools, there are plenty of resources that will help take service members and get them in front of potential employers and get them hired. But there's a far more challenging transition, and I'll quickly talk about former NFL quarterback Jake Plummer, who lives in the Denver area, in his nonprofit called Athletes for Care, which essentially does the same thing for former professional athletes. We talked about the NFL earlier and joked that NFL stands for not for long.
Right.
We talk about these young men in their 20s who that's their whole life, their whole identity. And then they may be done at 25, 27, 28. What do you do next? So profoundly important question. I think it starts with self. I think you have to set conditions internally that will allow you to transition and find a way to serve after the service.
Cool. So being a professional ultra runner, being a seasoned athlete, being an older athlete, getting into this sport at an older age, post-military career, I know it's extensive, but just so that the listener can understand what it takes for an elite ultra runner, a professional ultra runner at your age, to be able to perform the way that you want to perform. What goes into that in regards to, let's just quickly, we don't have to go really in depth, but just let's talk about nutrition, training, and then recovery. If you don't mind, just kind of breaking that up a little bit so we can understand what it actually takes.
Yeah, and let me start by saying I don't know that there's a formula. I think there's an azimuth, with some left and right limits you fall into. I don't ever pretend to suggest that I know all the answers. In fact, the older I get, the more I recognize how much I have yet to learn. I can share what works for me. So let's start with the nutrition bucket. I'm a plant-based athlete. That's been a journey with vacillating back and forth at times, but really started in my early 40s, moving to a pescatarian type format, then to vegetarian, then to completely plant-based. I vacillated back a little bit, but in the last few years, I've been a strictly a plant-based athlete. For me, that has worked, not only for the nutritional benefits, of which the data is overwhelming now, the health benefits of a plant-based diet, but for the moral and ethical component, and the moral obligation I feel that we are endowed with as humans to care for the animal kingdom and to treat animals with dignity. And so those things have worked in conjunction for me. That at 48, I'm as fit as I've ever been. I don't deal with a lot of the byproducts of challenges that come from a diet that, in my case, outside of plant-based, didn't work. Inflammation type injuries, list goes on and on, not sleeping and recovering well. So plant-based diet, it worked for me on multiple levels. The next issue kind of was training, and it goes back to, I think, your ethos. There's no shortcut. I get up every day between, for me, it's either 5:30 or 6. I have kind of my quiet reading time and meditative, reflective time, and then I get at it. I train with a legendary endurance athlete named Travis Macy of Macy Endurance Coaching. Trav is down in Evergreen. I have an incredible flexibility, stability, and mobility coach in Aaron Carson, who's the owner-operator of Rally Health and Sport, which trains some of the best world-class athletes in triathlon and marathoning, as well as ultra running. And things today, like my IV hydration. I'm asleep at 9 o'clock every night,
Right.
and it's my life. I mean, to kind of pull back a little bit, how do you do all those things? I mean, it's the construct for how I live. I mean, I put that much effort, into it, and so I don't know if that answers kind of where you were going for, but that's the nutrition training, and then the recovery. I touched on a little bit. Sleep is so critical. Tissue manipulation. So I have a rolfer. I have a chiropractor. I foam roll. All the things I learned the hard way as a stubborn, kind of hard-headed guy in his 20s, 30s, and early 40s. I've been blessed enough to be hit around the head enough where it actually sunk in.
Right.
So eat right, train right, recover right, and it's not differential equations or high-end calculus. The challenge, as you've seen, most people don't want to make that kind of commitment.
Right.
So if you do, heck, you better. There are plenty of better runners than me out there. I just try to make up for my lack of skills with hard work.
Cool. Would you speak on, for a moment, Joshua, the importance of community and surrounding yourself with the right people?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned working, I think, at the Y in Detroit, and communities that struggle with a lot of the socioeconomic challenges of bigger towns like Denver or Detroit. I think this question that you're posing is maybe one of the most important. For me, let me start with positivity. I have to be surrounded by people who love that I get to get up today and do something. I'm a mirror for negativity. I don't respond well to it. In fact, I've been in one community that I lived in where they were just a group of people that, in terms of the way it affected me, had a very negative influence, and it inhibited me from lighting that fire every day, or I allowed it to. It was the onus was me. I had to recognize, though, that negativity was dragging me down. That negativity was certainly not presenting conditions for me to achieve my athletic goals and ambitions. And I've come to a place that I love it. I love everything about Colorado. I love everything about the community I live in, and I've been able to carve out this pocket of just the most extraordinarily positive people that celebrate my successes, that support me, and I hopefully do the same for them. Because the rest of this stuff is all window dressing. Without an optimistic, positive environment, who knows what I'd be doing.
Right. Now, I read an article on you, and in that article, there was a quote that kind of stood out to me, and you said, "I'm standing on the shoulders of giants." What does that quote mean? And who are those giants? If you don't mind sharing that.
No, it makes me laugh that you found that. I think, the great gift of age and having, made a number of mistakes on this path that I'm on is, again, going back to the question about service and understanding that you're just a small part of a great big planet. There's nothing I'm doing that hasn't been done. There's nothing I'm doing that probably hasn't been done better by somebody. And that doesn't take away from my power. That doesn't take away from my accomplishments. But it's really recognizing that I'm part of a tribe. And let's use ultra running. If you don't appreciate the history of the sport you're in, you'll never achieve full greatness in my mind. You'll never even appreciate it like you should. I have been blessed to be able to follow this blueprint by the Scott Jureks and the Ann Traysons and the, this laundry list of amazing athletes. Some younger than me now, some older than me. There's nothing that I'm doing. There's no trail I've been on. There's no race I've done or route that I've done that hasn't been done by somebody. And for that, I'm thankful because I get to do it. I'm not the first guy out there trying to run Badwater.
Right.
And it allows me to measure my accomplishments against the people that I have tremendous amount of respect for. And I would really share that with young athletes. Like if I was as stubborn and bullheaded and self-centered as any 20-something out there, but I would share with them, if you really want to make a living at this, if you really want to be great and you really want to make a mark, learn who came before you and truly respect and appreciate and thank them for what they've done.
Words of wisdom. Beautiful. Thank you. We've been going a little over an hour, so I want to be respectful of your time,
Sure.
and I want to start transitioning into the wrap up. There's just a couple of questions that I want to ask here in closing, and this one will probably be, I'm assuming, pretty quick. Is there a favorite quote or is there a mantra that helps you to make it through the grind of your training and your life at this season?
Wow. Yeah. I wish I could. I used the quote on a post I put on Instagram today. Is a part of a quote from former President Theodore Roosevelt. It simply said, "Get action." Forward progress, forward momentum. Do something, whatever it is, and however you want to define your own purpose. Nothing is going to be accomplished without action, without effort. And I have several mantras, and I have several different quotes that I'll draw energy and strength from when I need them. But I think the underpinning of it, old Teddy Roosevelt had it pretty right. It was, get out there and do something.
I love. I believe he's the one of the man in the arena.
Yes.
Have you heard that
absolutely.
quote? Because I actually a really quick funny story. I actually printed that quote off and handed, because that last year, we were talking before we started the podcast, I was an elementary PE teacher K through fifth, and I actually printed off that quote and sent that quote home to all of my K through fifth grade students. Well, there was a parent or two that didn't think that was appropriate for K through fifth grade students. That's a little heavy, a little hardcore, and so I got called into the principal's office, the headmaster's office, and I didn't get in trouble, through the administration or anything, but he just gave me the advice of maybe saving that quote for some older students.
Right,
So,
right. I mean, I think that would have been right down the middle for your average Spartan kindergartner.
Exactly.
I love it.
Yeah, just maybe in the PC world we're living in, I could have maybe used a little bit better judgment. But man, I've had that quote posted up, in my office at school. I've had it posted up, in my room at my apartment or house and stuff. And it's just the man in the arena. It's just and it just dispels that. What you just said, like, just take action. Just who cares what everybody's saying? Who cares about the critics and the negativity? And now that a lot of us are a part of social media, there's always going to be, I don't like to use this word, but people use it nowadays, like haters and all whatever words, whatever you want to use. Those people are always going to be there. Right. But just be the man in the arena, take care of your business, and get stuff done. Take action. Exactly what you said.
No,
I love Theodore Roosevelt, man. And you type in his name and type in quotes. I mean, it's just quote after quote. And I didn't finish the book on him because it was just crazy. But I started a book on him, a very in-depth book. And I mean, he even as a young boy, like, he was just understood the importance of physicality and that physical training. And he was out in the Dakotas. I went to college in South Dakota. He was out in that area and ranching. And just a really fascinating story, especially for guys like us that are very in tune with physical culture and understand the importance of physicality. It's, man, what an amazing president and backstory.
And as a trail runner, what he did for conservation and environmentalism with the national parks,
right? Yeah,
and what he's done to reserve these amazing tracts of land that I get to go run on. Yeah, a visionary in a number
absolutely
of ways.
Yeah, beautiful soul for sure. So, all right, Joshua, we're gonna wrap things up here. What I just want to ask you, because you live currently in the Estes Park area. Is that correct? But then you come down to Boulder and spend a lot of time here. And I moved out here from Iowa, and I lived in South Dakota for quite a few years and things like that. Lived in Michigan. I just moved out here to be 2 years this coming July, and I'd visited out here. We've had relatives and family members living out here, but it's not until you actually live in Colorado that I really feel that I've found how amazing this state is, especially, again, going back to people that are involved or passionate about health and fitness and physicality and the physical culture and running and all these type of sports and athletics. What, in your estimation, just in your time here in the state of Colorado and being an athlete in Colorado, what makes this state so special and so unique and just so beautiful?
Wow, it's the most. I always have to guard against invoking hyperbole, because I sound like a paid advertisement for the Chamber of Commerce of Estes. Look, and I always want to place this within context. I've lived in some pretty amazing places. I've traveled extensively, and I know everyone's proud of their hometown. Everyone loves where they live, and that's a good thing. You should care about your community. So when I laud how extraordinary Colorado is, I do not mean it as a negative comparison to other places I've been or I've seen. Let me speak only to the beauty of colorful Colorado. Its people, its space, its community is unlike anything I've ever seen or experienced anywhere else. And Colorado is not some utopian concept. It has its challenges and struggles and downfalls like any other state or land. But by comparison, I've never experienced such positivity and energy
The beauty of its outdoors is unparalleled in my experience, as is the beauty of its people. And energy is an ethereal kind of this esoteric concept. But the 300 days of sunshine in the mountains, and it draws so many of us that come from somewhere else that get up, and the density of talent here from alpine to mountain climbing to mountain biking to running is just so inspiring.
Absolutely.
That, yeah, I look forward to going to the grocery store here. I look forward to running errands because of the people I'm going to run into,
right,
the friends I'm going to see, or how beautiful it is outside. I mean, it's kind of a rambling oratory, but this is it for me. Colorado is largely responsible for my accomplishments, be they fairly minimal so far in ultra running. They're intrinsically tied. I couldn't have one without the other. And I am absolutely in love with this state.
Cool. Last question. What do you want to be remembered for?
Being of service.
Being of service.
Yeah, and I just want to underpin that with not for just what I did in the military. If there's anything that I would say to challenge my brothers and sisters who have served beyond service, I better be doing more at my age and with the wisdom I hope I've accrued and the resources that I've accrued than I did just while I was in the military. But with what you're doing and what your mission statement is and your ethos is with 127, if I'm not known for serving, then I've come up short.
Thank you for sharing that, Joshua. So I just want to give you the opportunity right now to share any sponsors, any shout outs, anybody, anything, products, whatever helps you and whatever support you have. I just want to give you the opportunity to speak on that right now, Joshua.
Thanks so much. And if you'd like to support me, then please do that by supporting the sponsors that let me fulfill this dream of running professionally. I'll just go through a few. Ultimate Direction, My Spring Energy, Koya Life, Onus IV, Deeds Alone, Switch for Good, Suffer Better, and Heron Project are two nonprofits I race for. And then Levity Rolfing here in Boulder, and Wolf Chiropractic and Functional Medicine. If you can use their services, please do. And you can follow me on Instagram at my handle is @TumbleweedUltra.
Very cool. Thank you very much. And I just want to, again, I know I did it at the beginning of the podcast, but again, just man to man, I want to thank you very much for your time. And, I just reached out to you through Instagram, and you were just very, very kind and very responsive. And I'm just very appreciative of that. And again, I just want to thank you, Joshua.
Thank you for having me, man.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Much appreciated, brother.
So, listeners, thank you once again for tuning into the 127 Fit podcast and hanging out with my guest, Joshua Stevens, today, and myself. I am very thankful and very grateful for every person that tunes into the podcast and takes time out of your busy schedule to hang out with myself and the guests that are on the podcast. If you would like to reach out to me, you can reach out to me through Instagram at 127 Fitness. Facebook is at Quentin Vars, and then I also have the at 127 Fitness Facebook page set up. If you would like to read some of my writings through my blog, you can go to 127fitness.com. And I just cannot encourage you enough to please like, subscribe, share, and then most importantly, leave a review on whatever platform you are using to listen to the podcast. That just kind of helps get the word out there a little bit better. So thank you for doing that, listeners. And if you are interested in possibly being a guest on the podcast, or if you have some people in mind that you think would really be great to share their story on the 127 Fit podcast, please reach out to me. And that email would be 127fit@gmail.com. And you can also email me any suggestions that you would have, anything that maybe that you could help me to be just a better interviewer and things of that nature. I want to get better. I want to make this podcast the best that I can make it for you and also for my guests. So any feedback, positive, negative, or indifferent, again, just send me an email, 127fit@gmail.com. Again, listeners, thank you so much. And per usual, I will leave you with Proverbs 24:10, which states, if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. This time until next time, I will catch you guys later.